Hello, hello. Welcome, everyone. Today is plaid shirt day, apparently. Welcome to the Smart Sync workshop. It's 12 p.m. Pacific, and we're going to get started. My name is Tiago Forte. I am calling in from Mexico City. As I introduce myself, I'd love it if everyone on the call, we have over 100 people, if you could just put in the chat, which will be quite active, where you're calling in from, what city, what state, what country. I'd love to see kind of the variety of places that we have represented. As I said, my name is Tiago Forte. My company, Forte Labs, is an online education company. And for the purposes of this call, I teach a course called Building a Second Brain at buildingasecondbrain.com. And what is a second brain? A second brain is an external digital place where you keep all of your knowledge, your notes, your ideas, your research. I've been teaching that course for 3 years. We've had now over 1,400 graduates. And what we're going to be presenting you today is a little piece of that course, which is sort of the lowest hanging fruit. It's basically the easiest little way to get started with building something like a second brain, which is saving your reading highlights. So I'll tell you a bit more about that in a second, but I wanted to introduce my co-facilitator, David Perel.
Hi, everybody. I'm David, calling from Brooklyn, just outside of New York City. And I took Building a Second Brain in July 2017, and then this year developed an online writing course called Rite of Passage with Tiago. So basically, the two courses are kind of part of the same track. You could think of Building a Second Brain as the first part of the two-step system, which is saving your notes and actually building a system that we're going to go over today on how to actually capture all your information and store it in a very effective system. But then that system doesn't really begin to work well until you actually use it to publish consistently. So based on Rite of Passage, what I'm going to be doing a little bit later on is a live outlining session for all of you. And you're going to be amazed at just how fast you can use Tiago's system and then my writing system to create an outline. So that'll be coming in just a little while. And it's great to meet all of you. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, David. If you haven't found the chat yet, it's in the toolbar of the Zoom program that we're using for this call. If you click the button that says chat, you'll see this window pop up. And unlike other webinars, I don't expect this to be a purely one-way broadcast. I actually want you to have side conversations, back channel chats in the chat, put in your questions, put in your concerns, your comments, your doubts. When one of us is talking, the other one will be in the chat answering as many of those as we can. And if something requires a screen share or a demonstration or a discussion, we'll have that discussion, and we may even ask some of you to unmute yourselves and speak. One more piece of guidance on Zoom. Also, unlike most webinars, if there's any possible way you can turn on your camera, even if you're on a phone or a tablet or whatever, it makes for a much better experience for everyone. It actually reminds us that we're talking to humans. We also just love seeing your beautiful faces. And this is something we do in the calls during our courses too, is we ask people to actually be present, because much of the sessions are you talking to us, not just us talking to you. Cool, so I see people from all over: Nairobi, Sydney, San Francisco, Seattle, Porto Alegre, Columbus, Singapore, Miami, Boise, really the full range of locations, which always makes me so happy. Panama, Austria, Nashville, Madrid, Kansas City, Seattle. We have all over the place. Very, very cool. Okay, so we are going to dive right in and show you the context around what we're going to be talking about. Okay, so this is the Smart Sync workshop. Just a little bit of context. This used to be one of the first lessons in the course. It was sort of like that pistol at the starting line that gets everyone started. But then we realized that it was much better if people arrived at the course already having all of their reading highlights available. right? So it started being something that we did in advance, that we did weeks and then a month before it started. Then later we realized, you know what? This is something that's incredibly valuable, even if you never take our course, right? It sets you up for success, but even if you have no interest in building something like a second brain, because you're already doing almost all the work, the 99% of work that is actually the reading, which is hard. Like realize for a second how much effort it takes in this modern crazy world that we live in, where we have so many commitments with so little time. Our minds are fragmented through so many different notifications and interruptions and distractions. To sit down and read anything is already a remarkable feat. All we're doing today is adding that last 1% or less than 1% to just capture, to save, to collect, to curate what you've already decided and selected are the choicest nuggets of the things that you're reading. So that's why this workshop is fun. This is a strict requirement. You have to have fun during this hour, because we're really not giving you more work to do. We're not giving you this big extra project. We're just saying, put in that little end cap, to use a book analogy, and just save the stuff that you're already reading. So that's going to be kind of our focus in this hour. And as we mentioned, where all this comes from is these two courses. Building a Second Brain is kind of a lofty concept, but really it boils down to something that honestly is pretty mundane. It's mundane, and it's been around for hundreds, if not thousands of years, which is note-taking. Note-taking is something we all do in some form, whether it's on Post-its or legal pads or Moleskine notebooks or Apple Notes or your email or whatever it is. We're just making it digital. We're making it more rigorous and systematic. And then, as David said, we've created this sequel that David teaches called Rite of Passage, which is, now that you have all these notes, which you can use for any purpose, one of the best purposes is writing. So that's kind of where these ideas come from. So this starts with a habit. And it's something that I call, actually, I got this from David Allen. He called it the capture habit. And it's not a normal habit, you know, like brushing your teeth or waking up at a certain time or going to the gym. It doesn't necessarily happen at the same time all the time. But it's sort of something you notice. You know, when you read that last page in a book, you finish the last paragraph in the article, you finish that YouTube video, it's like a little thing in your brain that says, you know what, I could just take a minute and I could save this. That's the habit we want to cultivate. And what you're capturing is some of these things. You're capturing books, articles, notes, social media posts, podcasts, web pages, and not in their entirety. This is a point I'm going to emphasize again and again, but only the choice parts, only the best, the things that really surprise you, that jump out at you, that strike you, that offend you, that you think are outrageous or crazy or wild. Those are the things that you want to save, right? So it's really a curation. It's the act of curation. And I kind of want to start at the biggest picture here, and then we'll zoom into super, super practical, and I'll show you like literally how to click each button and save each of these things. But if you look at all of the information you're exposed to, there's really three kinds. There's type 1, which is information that is pushed to you, right? That's information that comes through notifications, those little red badges, emails you get. It's like someone, usually a company or corporation, says, we want you to have this piece of information, and it gets pushed to you. The second type, type 2, is information that you pull toward you. This is information that you decide. You sit down and you actually intentionally decide, I want to learn about this topic. I want to explore that theme. I want to work on this project. And type 3 is information that you create. You actually sit down and you put some sort of constraints. You know, you maybe stop consuming, you have some time constraints, you have a dedicated space for this, and you actually produce something. And at the biggest picture view here, what we're having people do with our work, first is move from type 1 to type 2 as much as possible. Right? This shift is really about peace of mind. If you don't move from sort of being out in the blizzard of things being constantly pushed at you and always reacting to what's in the moment, you're just going to be a basket case. You're going to be stressed out all the time. So part of what we're doing with the second brain is creating sort of a buffer. It's like creating this, you know, this protective barrier where incoming information doesn't just hit you right on the cortex, you know, with full force, but you have sort of a waiting area where you decide something that something should come into that area, and then you decide when you want to consume it. It's not necessarily right in that same moment. And then the second shift we want to have people make is from type 2 to type 3, is to spend, it's never going to be 100%, but as much of your time as you can, not just consuming at all, but actually creating. And that's less about peace of mind and more about fulfilling your potential, about expressing your creativity, accelerating your career, stuff like that. And so looking at that first shift, which is what we're focusing on, when you curate things, when you decide, okay, this is a book of, say, 85,000 words, but I'm only going to keep 2,000. Or here's an article of 5,000 words, I'm only going to keep a few hundred. You're really escaping what I call the reactivity loop. The reactivity loop is just anytime you have a free moment, you look outward, you look at social media or your email or Slack or whatever it is, and you expect something out there to tell you what you should be doing. And people try to run the loop faster. They go, oh, I'm just going to be more reactive, more responsive, but it's an absolutely losing game. The fact of reactivity is what makes you stressed out and makes it difficult to sleep and makes it feel like you're not making progress, like you're kind of on that hamster wheel. So really, this is almost like this metaphysical side effect of something as simple as saving your reading highlights, is you are making it easier for your future self to pay attention to something that is curated, which is your highlights. So let's look at what curation looks like. There's sort of a number of different kind of paradigm shifts, perspective shifts. You really shift your attention from purely public to more private things. Once your highlights are saved, it's like you have this little private area where you can mix and match them and edit them and highlight them and connect them together and all these different things that can only happen when you have this private domain. We're shifting your focus from things that are purely novel, what is always the new, to things that are a bit more timeless, right? Things that you've read in a book or in an article that you've decided you want to revisit that stand the test of time. We're shifting your attention from sensational to subtle, right? So instead of always just what is most attention grabbing, what is front and center, what the algorithms think is most important, which is never the subtle things. Once you start paying more and more attention to these highlights that you save, revisiting them, reviewing them, digesting them, chewing on them, your thinking gets much more subtle because you're simply spending more time in ideas that stand the test of time. And fourth, as I mentioned before, it's actually interesting. Just by saving your reading highlights, you sort of start transitioning your time and your attention from less toward consuming and more towards digesting. Right? It's the sensation when you look in your Evernote, and I'll show you mine in a second, and see, 350 books from the last few years, last 5-7 years. And then you look at your book on a shelf, you think, well, should I read yet another book? Or maybe I should just put into practice these 350 books I've already read in some way. Share them with someone, write a blog post on them, put them into practice in your life. Something like that. It's sort of, once you see how much you have, which is so much more than you expect, digesting and creating becomes more natural. So let's start to get more practical here. That was kind of the philosophy, which I always like to include. But think about, our relationship to information online. I chose what I think is a relatively uncontroversial or less controversial issue, which is the issue of paying student athletes, right? So you might come across this tweet, or it could be on Facebook or anywhere else. And what's your typical response? Is either nothing, you just ignore it because it has no relevance to you, or it's the hot take, right? And this is what you see 99% of the time on social media. It's a like, it's a retweet, or worst of all, it's a comment where you just sort of add, one more critical or biased comment to the conversation, not really thinking it through, just kind of dunking, I think it's called sometimes, dunking on the person or dunking on the opposition or dunking on the person mentioned. It's sort of just like, it's a way of acting online that just doesn't add anything and may even harm sort of the public discourse. So what we're talking about with the second brain idea and note-taking in general is, what if you saw this tweet and you said, you know what, I'm going to save it. And the example on the right is using the Evernote web clipper, which is a really, really useful tool where you just hit the little Evernote icon in the toolbar, you hit save, and this gets saved into your notes. I think someone has their microphone on. You could mute yourself. Let me just do that really quick. Okay, I just muted everyone. You could save this tweet as just part of a collection, right? Maybe you save an academic paper on this subject. You save a research report. You save a book you read. You save a podcast interview with an athlete. You start building up a mental model that actually has evidence and research and facts and quotes and stories and statistics and all these things. So then when you go to speak, whether it's just talking to your friend over dinner or something more public like a podcast or video or blog post, you have something to add. You have insights, you have analysis, you have like some synthesis of different sources, not just your thoughts in the moment. So I want to show you now some of the 5 or 6 most common ways of doing this. And there's more than that. There's actually an endless amount of ways of doing this. But we've seen now so many use cases that we have a small set that we think we can recommend. And we're really going to focus on 3 sources, which are ebooks, online articles, such as from news websites or blogs or different things like that, and then just web pages in general. Okay, so let's look at these one at a time. Excuse me. First is ebooks. This is an example using an ebook downloaded on Kindle, not the actual Kindle device. I've never owned a Kindle actually, but Amazon makes a Kindle app for iOS and Android. It's a free app. You can download it, buy ebooks. So let's say you are reading this, this ebook on your iPad. Many of you, I'm sure, already know this. It's quite a well-known feature, but there's a built-in highlighting to the Kindle app. So let's say I'm reading this. If I put down my finger where it says current allocation percentages, and I just start dragging, it automatically highlights in yellow what I've dragged over. If I then hit that highlights button at the top right, I can export just the highlights. And this is the key thing. It has to be only the highlights to an email. You can see it uses my built-in email program on my iPad to generate this email. You can see that little attachment, that HTML file that starts with Profit First, which is the name of the book, that contains only my highlights, only the excerpts. And then what I can do is most of the main note-taking apps, such as Evernote, Microsoft OneNote, I know Notion is coming out with this soon, have what is called it's like a capture email address. It's a custom email address only for you, where anything that is sent to that address automatically gets added to your notes. So what I do is I have that address for Evernote. I save it in my contacts. So I'm not going to show you the address because then you would be able to send me random stuff into my Evernote. But if I start typing EVE where it says 2, that contact will pop up. I hit the address, which is this long series of numbers and letters, send it to myself, and then that set of highlights shows up in my Evernote inbox. And it works very, very similarly for the other main note-taking apps. So that is an example using ebooks. Let's take the example of online articles. You know, more and more of our consumption these days is blogs and essays. If you read David's stuff, you know, you have these essays that you're reading. My blog posts too are also quite long. How do you save these highlights? So this is a blog post on a website called Farnham Street that we're big fans of. And the first thing you have to do, there's kind of an in-between step here, which is to save things you want to read to what's called a read later app. And I really, really highly recommend the 2 kind of front runners are Instapaper and Pocket. They're both free. They're both very easy to use. Let me show you this example using Instapaper. So let's say I decide I want to read this. I'm just going to hit that share button at the top right. So I'm kind of checking it out. Okay, this is something I do want to read, but it's too long for now. I'm going to hit share. I'm going to hit Instapaper. You can see it says saved. That took 5 seconds. Later in the evening, when I'm on the train, when I have free time, I can go over to Instapaper. You can see it syncs directly to Instapaper within a few seconds. And here's the article. From this point, it's similar to the Kindle. I just click and I drag the handlebar to select the parts that I want to keep. And I think with the new version of iOS, that's now easier. You don't have to drag the handlebar. I think you can just drag. Not sure how it works on Android, but I'm sure it's similar. And then once I've highlighted everything I want to highlight, all I have to do is go over to Evernote, and there it is. My highlights that I've saved, each one in its own notes, with the link to the original source right there at the bottom. Evernote has a feature called merge, where I would just select those, hit merge, and they would all go into one note. And how did I do that? So that actually isn't built-in functionality to Instapaper. It requires this in-between step using an app called, it's a really weird name, it's called IFTTT. Excuse me. Which stands for if this then that. If this then that is sort of like it's a tool, it's a free tool. Anytime you want two apps to talk to each other in a way that they don't already know how to do. So this, the little square you see in the middle, append Instapaper highlights to Evernote, is what's called a recipe. And a recipe just says, if this happens, do that. It's like an integration. It's like a little bot. So I turn this on. I can share the link to this in the chat afterwards if you're interested. But once it's on, it kind of listens in the background. There's nothing that I have to do. It just kind of is listening kind of on my phone, where anytime it notices that I've highlighted something in Instapaper, it automatically sends that excerpt to Evernote. So like I said, 100% automated, 100% free. Really, there's no excuse to not save the reading you're doing on the web in articles to Evernote or whatever app you use. IFTTT has similar recipes for OneNote, for Bear, I'm not sure if they support Notion yet, but all of the, or many of the most popular note-taking apps. It's quite universal. And the third one is Webpage highlights. So I'm gonna do this and then take a little break. I know I've given you a lot, but sometimes you have a website. It could be a blog post, or it could be, a product page, a sales page, a company page, someone's resume. I mean, websites come in infinite forms. Excuse me. And sometimes you just want to save a snippet. And it's not really a long form article, so you don't want to go through the steps of saving it to Instapaper and then coming back to it later. You're like, no, there's just this one sentence I want to keep. And this is a free tool that we use called Liner, L-I-N-E-R. It's made by a company in South Korea, I believe. And it's free. The basic version works fine. And it adds this little, if you see that highlighter icon in the very top right toolbar of my web browser, which is Chrome. So let's say I want to keep a sentence. All I have to do is click that highlighter button, and this essentially web highlighter turns on. Once I highlight something I want to keep, it automatically turns yellow and it says highlight saved. Once I've highlighted everything I want to save, I go to share. You can see there's options for email, Google Drive, Word, text, OneNote. I'm going to hit Evernote. And once I go over to Evernote, it's going to sync in a few seconds. Oh, it's already there. Okay. And what's so cool about this is now that it's in your private space, in your domain, you can edit it. You could bold something, you could add your own notes, you could add an image, you could add links to other things. It's like, before you know it, you're creating a document. You're creating a piece of knowledge that could have different sources from different places. And then, of course, you can share this, right? So think about how often people recommend, they go, oh, read this article, read this essay, read this book. How often do you actually do that? I know for me, I can rarely ever afford to read a book just because someone said, read this book, right? Or even long form articles, a big investment. But what I found is by saving these little snippets, it's like these quotes or even the sentence within the paragraph that I want them to read, people will definitely read that. And then my recommendations and my influence on them is actually much more effective because I'm not giving them this 5 to 10 hour task just to read the thing that I'm recommending. Oh, sorry, one more thing and then I take a break. Bonus round, PDFs. We seem to have an unusually large proportion of like scientists, researchers, librarians, academics basically who take our course, which makes a lot of sense. And for better or worse, mostly worse, so much of human knowledge is still captured and sort of trapped in PDFs, right? So I'm going to show you how to jailbreak those ideas and get them into a format that's more user-friendly. Basically, this is an app on my iPad, once again, called PDF Expert. Nothing special about it, really works the same as most PDF readers. And what I'm going to do is, as I'm reading this PDF, I'm just going to do very much the same thing, highlight what I want to keep. And you can see there's a button right there that says highlight. I can even click the comment button and add my own comments. I might say why I found it interesting, when it would be useful, and in what context it would be useful. Then I'm going to hit that share button at the top right, share it to Evernote, hit save, head over to Evernote, and you can see it is saved right there. And the cool thing, it's completely searchable. Even if I don't remember that that's buried on page 75 of the PDF, if I do a search in Evernote, and it has a very powerful search, most of these programs do, it will find the exact part that I've highlighted. So that's PDFs. So one quick thing is, I've shown you all free options. There is a paid option, as always, which makes it even easier. These are our friends at Readwise. We have no financial relationship with them. We just really, really like them. Costs $5 a month and basically automates the process I just showed you for ebooks and articles. So as soon as you made a highlight in your ebook, it shows up in a dedicated notebook in Evernote. It has a few other options as well, and same thing for articles. So I'll drop a link in the chat to my interview with the Readwise founders, where they kind of take you through how the service works. But other than that, my throat is starting to burn, so I'm going to hand it over to David for any comments you want to add or any questions that we've had.
Yeah, happy to answer some questions. I've been trying to reply in the chat as much as possible. We do recommend Evernote, at least for some of the things that we're talking about now, as opposed to Notion, just because Evernote has some better API integrations, meaning that it's actually easier to sync things like Instapaper and Kindle with Evernote. Now, that's just for now, and we are working on better and better solutions for Notion. One thing I just want to kind of reiterate on as just kind of a broader big picture metaphor is Tiago and I think a lot about how information is just essentially food. With both information and food, we need it to adapt to our environment. We need it to sense and to respond to the world and to make decisions and to take action in whatever we're doing. But just like food, we also need a balanced diet that nourishes us. And if you noticed when Tiago was talking about from sensational to subtle, from consuming to actually creating, a lot of that is about having this balanced diet, because just like cooking, like if you learn how to cook, well, you understand the ingredients that actually go into food, and all of a sudden you actually just begin to eat healthier. In the same way, I believe that if you learn how to write and you spend a lot of time creating ideas, then that actually improves what you consume and what goes into your brain. And so we think that it's best to have a good balance of short form and long form, simple and complex, entertaining and educational, trivial and lofty, familiar and novel. But it's all just like food, right? We want to have a little bit less junk food and a little bit more of that really hearty food. And we believe that writing and implementing this system is the best way to actually internalize that in a really deep way. But you know, I think another thing that I just want to hit on in terms of what it takes to consume quality information is this idea of escaping that reactivity loop. You know, so often we'll be scrolling Twitter or Facebook or whatever it is, and we'll see an interesting article, we'll stop what we're doing, and we'll get into reading that article for 10 or 15 minutes, right? We get out of the flow of what it is that we're doing. And because of that, we end up consuming more junk food in terms of information than we actually need to. And just like actual junk food, like a big can of Pringles, right? Informational junk food is also addicting. And it's kind of weird because we feel sick, but then we can't really stop eating it. And when you have these filters of trying to follow better people online, but then saving it to Instapaper and having all those articles compete for your attention, it actually begins to raise the bar of what you consume. So just kind of wrapping all that up, when it comes to the benefit of this system, well, the first thing is that you're going to have even more filters, which is going to make what you consume better. The second one is that you're not going to lose the most important information in your life, and you're not going to spend all that time, right, looking through your apartment or looking through emails for old information that you might have forgotten. And through that, you're going to be a much more productive knowledge worker in 2019 and moving forward.
Yeah, great. David, was there anything that I should address from the comments?
I hit on as many as I could. The big one was just with Notion. Do you want to talk a little bit about why we're using Evernote a little bit more rather than Notion?
Yeah, it's funny. I'm about to kick off literally in a few hours, in about 5 hours. We have the first of 6 meetups that I've organized in cooperation with Notion in 6 different cities. First one is Mexico City, which is tonight. And I'm going to be unveiling a talk tonight. And we're not going to film it right away because I need to practice a few times. But on the 30th of December, if any of you are in LA, you should come join us. But that one will be filmed. So about a month from now, a little over a month from now, that talk will be live on YouTube. But I can give you a small preview, which is basically, I think what's going to happen, this is the real summary. What's going to happen is digital notes apps like Evernote, Bear, OneNote, there's 24 or more, are going to refocus on what they're truly best at, which is capture. They're going to become something like a universal inbox, right? Imagine a universal inbox that anything you get in whatever format, from whatever source, at whatever quality, you can just put in this universal inbox. But then once you are sorted, it's kind of like getting the box and dumping it on your desk and you sort through it. You may have noticed it's not so easy to organize in Evernote, right? It's difficult to add structure. That is what Notion, which is really part of an entire generation of related apps, which is called the no-code movement, is going to be best at. For the notes, and it's a small subset, I think maybe 10 or 20% that really benefit from more structure, that need things like toggles and checklists and tables and databases, you're going to get those, move them into the Notion workspace and build them from there. But I have a whole half-hour talk that kind of lays out the rationale of this and gives lots of examples, but you're going to have to wait a little bit until that's completely ready. But that's my basic take. Okay, I don't have much more, but let me just give you a little more context. We're always doing context. So as you can see, I mean, I truly think there's not much to this capture thing. I mean, it does take a little bit of thinking. You have to think, you know, what are the things that I read? How do I save those? Takes a little bit of a habit, right? Just to export those things, or $5 a month. But it's really quite straightforward. You can solve the problem quite quickly of how to save, you know, maybe not every single last letter you read in the universe, but the 80-20 of it, which is what we always go for. But the more interesting challenge that you run into once that's taken care of is what to keep. And this is something that we have, I personally didn't fully realize how transformational it is and how counterintuitive it is until pretty recently, actually, which is when people usually go to keep stuff, they keep everything. I think it's a combination of indecision, just not knowing, oh, what in this article is good, let me just keep it all and I'll think about it later. It's a combination of a little bit of the hoarder mentality, right? Like the FOMO, the fear of loss, just wanting to preserve it all. It's a little bit of laziness, right? I don't know what paragraph in this text is most important. I'll just keep it all. It's many different factors. But one of the biggest leverage points in your entire information workflow is at the very beginning. If you can be, the more selective and discerning and picky you can be at the very intake, you save time for yourself at every single subsequent step of your workflow. So think about yourself as like a series of cells through time. When you keep little at the beginning, you pass on little, and so it's easy for the next person, and then the next person. It's like every version of your future self has an easier time. So I try to give you as many criteria and strict criteria for what to keep as possible. I mean, the basic idea here is more is not better. That might be like one of the deepest ideas in this whole thing. More information, I mean, more anything, more more consumption is not better, more stuff is not better, but even more information is not better. More insights might not even be better if you're not putting them to use. So, some of my very best notes are like 5 sentences on a 150,000 word book, right? That to me is in a way more useful if I have a more condensed summary that's only 5 sentences. So I never again in my entire life have to go back to that monstrosity of a book. I can just reference these 5 sentences. So in general, the less you have, the better. Less is more. So here are 4 of the most helpful criteria that I found to use. First, inspiring. It's sort of like in the era of Google, facts have been commodified. Any fact you can find. If you know the fact you're looking for, what is the population of Nigeria? What is the capital of, Kazakhstan? Like Google will just instantly find that. You don't really need to save stuff like that. But stuff that is inspiring, that has kind of an emotional resonance. We talk a lot about resonance. That often you can't say why. It's not an analytical thing. It's not a head thing. It's a heart thing. It resonates with you on an emotional, intuitive, even spiritual level. When you save that, you save the excerpts that really resonated with you, and you transport those through time. I kind of think of notes as a time travel machine. What that means is, in the future, when you sit down to create something, a talk, a presentation, a blog post, what I found is you could almost recreate that state of mind. You can re-inspire yourself because what resonated back then is likely to resonate with you again. And that state of mind is not something that you can Google. You can't Google inspiration. You can't Google, these sort of very fleeting, temporary states of mind, which is why it's worth capturing them. Another one is useful, right? So this is kind of the opposite. Is sometimes, or actually always, when I'm reading, I feel like I'm like an engineer walking through a junkyard looking for parts. It's like I'm a scavenger. I'm a scavenger in like a post-apocalyptic, world. It's like, what can I use? Oh, here's an engine. Can I rip it apart and take out these pistons? Oh, here's an old like tractor. Can I get the rubber from this tire and just rip it off and use it for this other thing? It's like, I am deconstructing everything I consume for parts. And in information terms, what those look like are sources, right? This may be, really authoritative scientist said something about climate change. Okay, you can just carve out that quote or that data point or whatever they're saying, keep it, and then use it as a building block in something else that you're creating. It's really kind of how I think is in terms of building blocks, right? Like if I want to make an argument, and usually it's a small set. I need to make these 5 points, right? If you notice those 5 points already made for you in some other source that you're reading, take them, steal them. I mean, credit the source, obviously, but let others do the work for you. Stand on the shoulders of giants, for God's sake. And sometimes it's a tool. Sometimes like you see a writer use a certain kind of format, right? Like I'll notice a writer does, a list of 5 pros and 5 cons. And I'm like, oh, that's a great tool. I don't care about the content. Actually, none of this is relevant to me, but I like the container that he used. That's an example of a tool. I'll save that with a little note. Use this list of 5 pros and 5 cons in my writing. It's a great example. Couple more, and then I'm going to ask, so be thinking, what are some of the criteria that you like to use? I'm going to ask you to write in the chat in a minute how you choose the kinds of things you want to save. Third is easily lost. So an example is, the manual to your car. Okay, that's probably 200 pages, super detailed, but that's not the kind of thing you want to, scan and save in your notes. When you have a need to know something about your car, you're going to look in wherever it is you keep that, the glove compartment, the tool chest in the garage, whatever it is. But something like a quote about creativity, that's the kind of thing that's like, I know this is useful, I know I'm going to use it, but I have no idea how. There's no obvious use case. That's the perfect thing you want to save in your second brain, because your second brain is always resurfacing things for you. And fourth is personal. So going back to Google, Google has everything that's on Google doesn't really give you an advantage, right? There's no competitive advantage in being able to Google some random fact because everyone else has access to it by definition, right? It's been completely democratized. But think about your personal knowledge that's unique to you, that's personal, that was hard won through your personal experience, through your jobs, through your projects, your relationships, I mean, especially your hard experiences, that, I'm talking about wisdom, personal experience. Those are really good things to learn. They might not be useful to anyone else. It might be some cryptic piece of wisdom that no one else knows what it means. But when you see that in the future, like this is the big advantage, that your second brain is just for you. It's not for anyone else. You can share pieces of it if you want, but because it's fundamentally for you, not public, you can be messy, you can be a little bit random, you can sort of make inferences, you can make logical jumps. No one else is going to see this. No one else is going to criticize you. It's kind of like your own little playground. It's very fun. So just the last kind of big picture note here. I think it's clear the level of information consumption that we are expected to handle is completely insane. It's honestly inhuman. It's human brains trying to compete with machines that never sleep, that have no limits, that just continuously funnel things at us 24/7. And I've noticed there's this school of thought that's getting more and more popular. Books like Essentialism, like Deep Work, the minimalism trend, which I think taken to an extreme, they have good ideas, but taken to an extreme can become digital abstinence, which is the idea that online bad, social media bad, millennials bad. It's like this extremist view that the online world is somehow inherently evil. And then the only prescription becomes abstinence. You have to go off, you have to throw away your cell phone, turn off the internet, not have social media accounts. And there's nothing wrong with that approach if you feel it's needed, for example, for your mental health. But I prefer the analogy that David mentioned, which is information is food, right? There's bad food, there's even poisonous food. There's food that will kill you. But just like food, you need information. You cannot live without information. And given that's the case, and that there's vastly different qualities and kinds of information, what is the diet that you're going to put yourself on? Is it going to be just what everyone else is reading, what happens to catch your eye, what BuzzFeed thinks is most important today? Or is it going to be something that the wisest person has curated for you, and that's yourself, your past self? I think that's a much healthier and a much more realistic point of view, and one that allows you to take advantage of what we see as the greatest flowering of human civilization ever invented, which is the internet. I mean, I can't recommend that you ignore and step away from this incredible explosion of creativity that we now have access to. In fact, I think you should take advantage of it. You should surf it. You should leverage it into whatever it is that you want to create in the world. So, that's it. So I'd love to hear, we have about 18 minutes left. I'm going to end right on time. But what are some of the other criteria that you use to decide what to keep? Are there any interesting ideas? David, have you seen anything?
There haven't been as many on that. The big interesting idea is so that you look like Elon Musk. And there was one other funny one in there. There's been some good jokes in the thread. Do you want me to do a live outlining session to show what this looks like, or do we want to sort of zoom through that?
Yeah, can you take about 9 or 10 minutes to do that?
Yep.
Okay, so this is like the last thing we have to show you, but I want to jump to that creation that we keep harping on. What does it look like to create, in this case, a piece of writing? David, this is David's party trick. When you have all of these notes at your disposal.
Yeah, so here is the plan. We're actually going to do a group creation session. This is when I get my spot on Vegas on the Strip next to Penn and Teller or Cirque du Soleil. This is what I'm going to show off. So I'll do in about 8 minutes. What we're going to do together is create an outline, basically. So I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to need participation from as many of you as possible. What you're going to do is just write ideas in the chat, and basically I'm going to take different ideas and I'm going to turn them into an outline. So I'll show you exactly what this looks like. So what I'm going to do is sharing my screen right now, and you'll see there's my Evernote on the right, and you'll see this outline on the left. So if all of you or if some people could just start throwing some ideas in the chat, that would be great. Preferably I'm going to start off with something about business, and just sort of look through my different notes on business, and sort of see what I find. Transcending. Let's see. Yeah, let's start with this idea of Hanlon's razor. Never attribute to stupidity or malice what we can attribute to stupidity. So what I'm doing here is I'm just sort of taking different ideas and trying to have an outline just sort of emerge, maybe an idea just emerge. So something around Hanlon's razor, let's do incentives. So what I do is I just come into my Evernote and I type in incentives, and that reminds me of Charlie Munger. So let's see if there's any good quotes about, here we go, right here. So Charlie Munger once said, never ever think about something else when you should be thinking about the power of incentives. So maybe Charlie Munger reminds me of Warren Buffett. The two of them are business partners. So these are all my notes that mention Warren Buffett that I have just immediately at my disposal. And if you have any ideas as you see this for ideas that could connect with what I'm writing about, please throw them in the chat and I'll take whichever ones sound interesting. Okay, so I have this idea from Buffett. I'll sort of have a Warren Buffett little section here. Let's see. That looks interesting. Whose bread I eat, his song I sing. That's very good. So work, let's see, incentives. So let's see if there's any kind of theses that can begin to come together. Nice, incentives, agency problem. Eric, do you want to sort of elaborate on that a little bit? I actually probably have something with your name in Evernote. Let's see. Eric, I have all my notes from your book. Let's see what's in here that I've actually gone through. Nice. So you let's see. Go to coffee, send good follow-up emails. Just sort of getting different notes in here. Nice. I like this. Help first. Let's see if you wrote anything about incentives. No, let's see, Munger. Okay, let's go back to, well, we did an interview together. So, you see, I'm just sort of looking through here. I have a nice thing that you said about me. Psychotherapy. See if I have anything about that. Okay. Okay, so let's see if there's, we'll do one other. I think this is, okay, so right here, I just have a series of different notes. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to sort of try to find a thesis within this. So our thesis could be that, let's see, thesis could be that incentives are the single most important thing to prioritize, but the incentives we should give ourselves should change throughout our lives. So what I could do now is I could talk about childhood, sort of the first section of life, then the second section being young adulthood, kind of building off of Eric's ideas of for career advice for uniquely ambitious people, which is the title of his book. And then I could talk about business. And then I could bring all of these for under kind of the business section. I don't know that I need any of this stuff. So I'll move this into young adulthood. And then for childhood, maybe some incentives could be the SAT. I'll go through my education section. and see what I have about SAT. Here we go. Let's see. So this is some interesting data about science and regretting different education. So let's just say people regret humanities majors the most according to the science. So we could say, so students have an incentive to prepare for being young adults and later the business world. So then I could sort of take this and ladder up to my thesis here. So each stage of life prepares us for the next one. From students, being a student, to being a young professional, to investing or starting a business, prepares us for the next one. So that's sort of in 5 minutes what I can do. And as you see, I already have kind of the basic structure of what an outline for an article would look like. So what I would do if I mean, this is just 5 minutes. So if I could spend the next 10 minutes, what I would do is I would just talk about different childhood incentives. So for example, there's a crazy image that I have somewhere. Let's see, I could sort of bring these notes in. Those are awfully highlighted. So I could talk about creativity, courage, open-ended problem solving. I like this interview. Let's see. I love that. That's sort of a great little idea to throw in here. So I would start off talking about the intrinsic curiosity of young children, but then I would probably talk about how you would take that curiosity and give kids the incentive to actually prepare for young adulthood. And then I would talk about, once you're a young adult, how do you kind of structure your life so that you have the incentive to begin to thrive in business. And I actually think that would be a pretty interesting article. So that is how an outline looks in just about 7 minutes. And as you saw, basically what I can do is I can go through this Evernote system. You'll see I have all of these notes on Christianity, on city-states, on creativity, on design thinking, on Eastern thought and meditation. And as you can see, I can just draw upon my entire tapestry of knowledge. And one thing I just want to reiterate is I don't even remember consuming a lot of these ideas. I just kind of save things that are fairly interesting into my second brain, whether they're screenshots or different notes. And then when it's time to create something, I can be, 10 times more efficient than the average person, probably even more. Tiago.
Yeah. I mean, I know it's probably hard to, oh, my camera, there we are. It's hard to get a sense of what that's really like, but it really is magical. When you start, instead of sitting down, what should I research? And then having that writing goal just so far in the distance, like how could I ever get there? You sit down with, seriously, it feels like about 80% of it done. Your ideas, your problem switches from, I don't have anything to write about, to I have way too much to write about. Right? Most people have one good idea and they try to get as many pieces of content out of that idea. With this system, you switch to trying to cram as many ideas into one piece of work. It's like a complete flip. And we get into tons of more examples, how we use this approach to create workshops, to create websites, to hire people, to do business development, to create speeches. It really is like kind of a universal creative process using these notes as fundamental building blocks. I want to spend a little bit more time telling you about the course. A couple of you asked some questions that I'll try to get to. Basically, we're at this really amazing and also kind of scary turning point with building a second brain. It's been 3 years since I led 20 of my friends and family through this prototype. 3 years of this as just my focus and the thing that I've been building. And we recently had to make a decision, which is, we could just make this a self-paced course, make it just some website that you just sign up to when you do it at your own speed. But we decided to go a different direction, and that's based on something that we've seen again and again, which is this is really transformational. It's not just a how-to. If there was a how-to, it would just be a YouTube video. When you work with the second brain, it changes everything about how you work. Changes the things you consume, like we talked about, changes how you spend your time, changes the people you spend time with, changes your career ambitions, changes the way you relate to peers and coworkers. It really is this incredibly holistic change that happens. And that kind of education happens in groups, right? It's transformative education happens when you have this group of people that you can learn with, that you see mirrored, right? You see models, you see examples you can copy. Look at this chat. Look at the richness and the depth that we went into just in a freaking chat in a 1-hour Zoom call. This is the experience that we try to create and try to amplify over what will now be a 6-week intensive boot camp, along with about 100 or 150, or if we succeed, 200 other people from all over the world. So as part of that, on Friday at midnight, the price of building a second brain is going to greatly increase. It's going to go from an entry level of $4.99 to $7.99. It hasn't changed from $4.99 in 3 years. And what we're doing with that price increase is we're building a real education company. We're hiring full-time staff. We're making the course longer. We're going to have more feedback sessions, more breakout rooms. We're going to have a whole new accountability system that I'm super excited to show you guys in a couple months. The next cohort will not be scheduled until March, late March. It will kick off. But there's so many of you, and I get messages every day from people who have been following me in general and the second brain evolution for years. I get emails that you've been saving up for like months or the past 12 months. And I want to give all of you one last chance to get in at the current price, which is $4.99. Here's the website where you can read all about it. And here's an email subscription form for this Black Friday deal, which, as I said, ends Friday. I'm going to be announcing bonuses. I normally never do bonuses. I don't want you to make the decision based on bonuses, but I'm really creating the best ever building a second brain bundle that has ever existed. So today, tomorrow, and Friday, I'm going to be announcing bonuses, and you'll receive them if you get on that list. If you want to read about the full deal right away, you can go to this link. And if you want to check out the community, join the Facebook group. In fact, if there's any questions from this session that we didn't answer, I can't promise I'll get to every single one, but the community is so awesome. Every time I see a post on Facebook, or we also have a Slack, usually by the time I see it, there's 2 or 3 or 4 or more awesome responses. So I really, really invite you not just to join a course. I really don't think of it just as a product you buy off the shelf, but as a community that we're building that is really the highest quality group of people that care about ideas and knowledge and information and managing them effectively that I've ever come across. I mean, I couldn't find it, so I had to create it. And I really encourage you to join. If you purchase at any time, this is true of all past students, you get lifetime access not just to future course updates, which I release every few months, but also to any future cohort. So if you want to take the course again, or there's some part you missed, or you couldn't make one of the live sessions, twice a year, there's going to be another opportunity for you to join another round. It's really kind of like a lifetime club that you only pay for once, and you'll have indefinite access to anything that's created inside that container.
Tiago, can you confirm the dates for the next Building a Second Brain?
I can't exactly. We're currently scheduling, we're gonna schedule Rite of Passage and Building a Second Brain for next year so that they don't overlap. So you can take both if you'd like, but Rite of Passage will be the first one of the year, and then followed shortly thereafter by Building a Second Brain. And we'll send a recording of this call to everyone who registered, along with the transcript of the chat, minus any private messages. Let's see, Kanisha just wrote me about the bundles. Just sign up to that email list, which is that second link that I I put in the chat, and I'll be emailing you a few times over the next basically 48 hours. Awesome. Well, I want to end on time. Thank you all for being part of this. It's been super fun as always. And I hope, whether you join us in the next few days or in March or ever, I really hope that you'll just stick around and continue to be part of this kind of note-taking revolution, knowledge revolution that I see happening. It's pretty exciting. And I think in the next months and years, you're going to see incredible steps forward in our ability to do everything that we talked about. So I hope to see you online later.
Thanks, everybody. Really appreciate your time. Hope it was helpful. And just if you have any questions, if there's anything, any way that we can serve you, anything we can help with, please just let us know. A lot of our work is just responding to people's questions and trying to answer them as much as possible. So please reach out to us. We want to hear from you. And thank you so much for your time today. It was great to see all of you. I'll see you soon. Bye, everybody.